So just an announcement for those of you guys here and those online, this meeting is being recorded.
Meeting is in order. Okay. Our speaker tonight is Craig Ebersole. Craig graduated from Juniata College with a BS in Geology and obtained a GIS certificate from Penn State. He has had a varied, highly varied experience. He worked for PennDOT as an intern. He was a field technician for mountain research. He worked at AES and Liberty Environmental before he got in with PADEP in their safe drinking water program. And I think he was there when I met Craig first at one of the field conferences, and then he later moved over here to the survey. And he's currently a senior geoscientist, but he's got his license, so he's a geologist. And he's working on geographic information services, and that's basically what he's going to tell us about tonight. So take it away, Craig. And thank you.
All right. Thanks for the intro, Kent. As Kent indicated, my name is Craig Ebersole and I work here at the Pennsylvania Survey. And tonight I'm going to be talking to you about geological applications of our very budget-conscious drone program. And this is pretty exciting to be on this side of the room. I've been coming to these meetings for about a decade. And so it's really exciting to finally give something back to the group. So let's dive right into this. So really tonight, this is kind of a presentation designed to answer a lot of questions and show folks that this is very accessible technology. So I've talked to a number of folks who've just been curious about what I've been doing for the past couple of years. And we're going to be covering stuff from, how much this costs to how do I do all of this, what equipment do I have, and what software I use. So it's going to be kind of a wide-ranging presentation. And we're going to start off by looking at my equipment and methods. And then we're going to look and see how the drone has been can improve field safety and field efficiencies. And then we're going to take a while and we're going to look at a lot of high resolution imagery and all the fun stuff that you can do with that. So I want to thank Mike Moore for sending me down this path shortly after I was hired here in 2018. And he just came to me and said, do you want to start a drone program? And I said, yeah, sure. That sounds fun. So I started thinking about it, and there's a few guiding principles or points that I wanted to stick through while I was making this. And first and foremost in my mind was I want to be conscious of the amount of money we're spending on this because it's new technology. We've never used it. We don't know if we're going to use it too much. So I don't want to, blow the budget right out of the gate. So to that end, I tried to minimize the cost of one-time purchases, and then I tried to outright eliminate reoccurring costs. So I'm sure everybody here is aware we live in an era where software is subscription-based, and I wanted to avoid that in all possible cases. And I also wanted to maximize the applications that we could use our hardware for. So I didn't want to just be limited to taking nice pictures of landscapes from the sky. I knew you could also make ortho mosaic maps out of it, digital elevation products, and 3D models. So I wanted to be aware of that in the future. And then finally, I really wanted to retain control of as much data processing as possible. So a lot of options for making maps and processing locational data. It's what I refer to as like a black box solution. So you take your data and you just package it all up and you push it up into the cloud to some company who they process it and you're at the mercy of what they decide to do to it. And then they send you a finished product back. And that doesn't really sit well with me, maybe because I grew up using cantankerous versions of Windows software. And, when I was a kid, I wanted to play Warcraft 2 on my computer and it just didn't work. So I spent weeks, troubleshooting that to see how I could do that. And that was in the era before I had the internet. So I'm very comfortable troubleshooting software and computer problems and figuring out how things work and getting my hands dirty. And I didn't want to give away that to some company and not know what they're doing with it. So I want to be aware of the budget, maximize what we can do with it, and retain as much control over everything as possible. So Let me get the most boring slide of this whole presentation out of the way right up front. You do need to be licensed to do this. You need what's called an FAA Part 107 license, and that's regulated by the FAA. It's not insurmountable to get. It's a pretty basic test, and I actually thought it was pretty interesting to study for it. It really gives you an appreciation of airspace and all the rules and regulations that the FAA has developed over the years to really make our skies remarkably safe in this country. And you can take that test at just about any FAA approved testing center. And then you do need to take a recurring training every 2 years. And that was changed very recently. This used to be another knowledge test that you go in and sit down and take, and you had to pay money for it. Now it's free. It's online. It's through their website, and it's really designed to bring you up to speed with any regulatory changes that happened. This is the previous time you sat for an exam. So it's really just, here's what's changed since you checked in last time. And then you do need to maintain registration with your drone, but it's super cheap and it's good for 3 years. So here's the drone we use. It's a DJI Mavic 2 Zoom. It shoots 12 megapixel pictures up to a max resolution of 4,000 by 3,000 pixels. It can shoot up to 4K video. It has a zoom lens, which is very exciting. At the time we bought this, I think it was the only drone that came equipped with a zoom lens on the market that was also a reasonable cost. And it has a very compact form factor. So all 4 of those prop arms can fold up nice and tight to the body, which is really nice if we need to take this somewhere that you can't just park your truck somewhere and just work off your tailgate. So if you need to carry equipment, you're not dealing with big carrying cases. You can toss all of this in a backpack and get to where you're going. And I also have 5 batteries for this. And you might get tired of me hearing me talk about batteries here in the front part of this presentation, but power consumption is a major consideration if you get into this work. So these batteries give us what I call comfortable flight time. We can get 100 total minutes of that. So if you look at the specs of batteries, if you're thinking about investing in something like this, you'll see, oh, the battery's good for 31, 35 minutes. But in reality, you need some of that power to turn on the drone, to calibrate the drone, to check your sensors, to do a test flight, to make sure everything is working. This is a lot of best practice stuff, and all of that's going to take some energy. And then you need to take consideration flying to your subject that you're going to be mapping or taking pictures of, and then enough time to get back to you, the remote pilot, safely and land. Because it's very stressful to be in a situation where you're almost done with your project and the alarm is beeping at you while you're on your last battery trying to scramble to get the job done. And now that we're up to 5 batteries, that has not happened to me. And I don't miss that sound at all. So here's an example of a quality of things get bigger. There's a little bit more detail. It's really nothing to write home about, but it's actually very useful. And I have another use case of it later on in the talk. So continuing with my theme of, bringing as much out of this hardware as possible, we got into drone mapping. And to do that, you really should use ground control points selected at a sub-centimeter level of accuracy. That's going to make a reliable end product for you. And to do this, we invested in EMLID Reach RS2 units. They're very capable units, kind of from a scrappy company. It's not a big name company, but they're absolutely get the job done. And when we were shopping around for equipment, looking at comparable equipment from a larger manufacturer, I was looking at like $10,000 to $12,000 for just a single one of these units. And these are about $2,500 a unit. So that really helped keep the budget down. And then here's an example of the control points we use. That upper one, that monstrous orange and black one, I just bought within the past week or 2 when I haven't had an opportunity to go out and use it. But I'm very excited to, because I think it's going to appear better than a 5-gallon bucket lid with some patterns on it. Here you can see what those bucket lids look like. They're kind of problematic because they're a glossy surface and it reflects a lot of light, and that white really overwhelms the camera sensor. But you can pretty much see the center of it, and it's been working pretty well for us so far. But I'm excited to use those big guys. They're also very weighty, so they're not going to blow around. It's very critical that your targets stay where you put them for the entire time you're out working. And then we have an iPad mini, which is kind of the brains of everything. And it's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. So we're coming back to this power consumption consideration that you have to keep. Since it controls everything, its battery is draining on this guy constantly throughout the day. So I really recommend, if you decide to go this route, to get one of those portable battery chargers. So anytime you're not connected to your drone, because you do need to connect the drone remote control to the iPad to pilot it and calibrate it. So anytime I'm out collecting data with my MLIDs, I've got it hooked up to my battery charger to just always stay topped off. We use a number of softwares to get the job done. So here's one of the most heavily used here. This is Drone Deploy. It's a free application. It exists as a web-based app and also as an app you can install on any mobile device. And as long as you're signed into the same account on both of those, they'll sync up. So this is an example of the desktop version of the application. And I like to try to do my initial planning in this because I like the interface a lot better. I really like a nice mouse and a keyboard. I really don't like touch screens. They've got me into a couple pickles where I bump a button and I adjust a setting when I don't even think I'm touching the screen. So at a minimum, I do all of my initial delineation of the mapped area on the desktop because it's a lot easier to drop all those nodes and move them around with a mouse. And you'll see there's a lot of information on here to help you plan out your flight. Right here, these are some of the most critical pieces of information you'll need. So as you adjust all the settings in here, you'll see your flight time change. You'll see the area that you're going to be mapping, how many images it's going to be, and how many batteries that project's going to take. And those parameters are controlled very heavily by just a few parameters on here. So flight altitude is a major player. So if you think about how that might affect things, the higher you fly, each picture is going to see a larger footprint of the ground, but there's going to be a lot less detail in that. Whereas if you're flying low, you're going to see a much smaller footprint, but there's a lot more detail in there. And this has a big effect on the resulting resolution of any ortho images that you would make doing this. And you can see with these settings here, it's predicting roughly 0.6 inches per pixel resolution. And that's just crazy to me. So if you think back just 15 or 20 years ago, whenever the PA map program was collecting ortho imagery across the state, the best of my knowledge, that was the first widely available ortho imagery for the state and that anybody could access and use in GIS software. And that was a foot per pixel. And here we are in 2022, capable of getting sub-inch per pixel. Like, this has me drunk with power of just making site maps on demand. Like, this is very powerful stuff to have in your hand as a geologist. And then also the overlap controls how many pictures and your flight time. So all those green lines are flight paths, and you really want to have as much overlap as possible because things are stitched together by matching points in photos taken next to each other. So the more match points you have between pictures, the better stitching you're going to get in the resulting mosaic, and it's going to have more detail. 70% is kind of on the lower end of things. I like to stay between like 65 and about 80%, but 70 to 75% usually gets the job done, and it's a nice. This whole flight planning is kind of a balancing act, and how many batteries you have, how much file space you have, how much time you want to spend processing the data, what you're actually going to do with the data. So it's really a case-by-case thing that it's best learned. You kind of understand the basics, and as you work through projects, you see what works and what doesn't work. So to do manual flights and to calibrate the drone, we use DJI Go 4, and that's just the stock mobile app that comes with this equipment. It's free. You can install it, and you need this everywhere you go at a minimum to calibrate the compass on your drone, because it does have a compass as you move around the state. Magnetic fields change, and it can get confused unless it's calibrated site to site. And then it also you can use this for a lot of information. It's got a really robust HUD, or a heads-up display. I don't know if that's really the correct terminology for what this is, but I use it and it works for me. So you can see kind of like the distance you are from your takeoff point, the height above your takeoff point, how much battery you have. This is where you can change all the settings for the quality of photograph or video that you're taking. And then in the bottom left, that's what I call the mini map. And so you can see where the remote control is, and you can also see where the drone is. And this is really handy if you lose track of the drone, which is shockingly simple to do. Even though there are regulations saying it has to stay within line of sight, it's very surprising. It does not take a great distance away from you before it just becomes a little black speck in the sky. So there's been a couple of times where I've lost track of it despite my best efforts, and I've really relied on that mini map to figure out where it is, where to look in the sky for it. And then in a few cases of just all hope is lost, and I've navigated it back to me just purely by watching that red arrow on the map. To process our location data, I use a suite of services or suite of applications. So first one here is RTK Lib. It's a collection of 3 free applications. They're very lightweight. They don't even install on your computer. They're just standalone applications that run. And that's RTK Conv, RTK Post, and RTK Plot, or RTK Convert, post-processing and then plotting the data. And then I also use Opus, which is a great service provided by the National Geodetic Survey. That is the online positioning user service. So generally, my data processing method is I start with RTK Conv, and I work with the data that the base station collects. And then once I get that into a state that I'm happy with it, I'll push it up to Opus's service. They'll do their magic. This is kind of one of those black box things, but this is a free alternative, so I'm happy to embrace it. And I trust NOAA to do a good job on this. And then they send you an email back with some parameters that you'll then take into the RTK Post software, where you correct your rover's data with some of the values that NOAA calculates and sends back to you. And then finally, you can visualize all of that in RTK Plot. And I really like this image. This is from a site we visited this summer. Me and Chris Ost, another geologist on staff here, took 2 interns out for a day to fly an outcrop. And we shot a number of GCPs where they're all circled in red here. And this is one of the methods you can use for figuring out your ground control point locations. You can do it visually, or you can kind of do it through a spreadsheet. But I really like doing it visually because I like to see the data, be confident that I'm selecting the right points. And you can zoom in to quite a fine scale in this. So I don't know if you can really see very clearly in the bottom right, there's a little scale bar that's 5 meters. So as we go in closer, you can see now we're at 20 meter scale. And here that scale bar is 5 millimeters. And this is where the rover sat collecting points on the target. And then at this point, to get my control point location, I could select a number of these points and average the X, Y, and Z. You could select a single point and just use that X, Y, and Z location for your control point. Or if you're more comfortable in spreadsheets and know what time the rover was actually on there, it's very straightforward to go in and just kind of pull out X, Y, and Z's to average based on the time they were collected. And as Kent so often says, he's just really looking for a good story at these. And I think this data tells a really fun story of a day in the field. So we tasked the interns with shooting these control points. And they started down here with the first GCP. And then here's the second GCP. And that was up probably about 15 to 20 feet in an outcrop. And I'm sure everybody in this room and online has been in a situation where they want to get on an outcrop. And it looks like it's a pretty straightforward process to get where they want to go. And then you get a few feet off the ground and the ground just kind of gives away and you surf your way back down on some shale or whatever. And maybe you cut up your hands or whatever. So the interns, it was up to them how to get up here. So, they started over here. They tried to, make kind of a brute force path up the hill. It didn't work. So they came back down. Then they found this path that worked. And then they bumped the rover against the outcrop here. And that's what all this noise is. And then they got over here and they found themselves in a very undesirable position where they realized they can't go forward the path they thought they were going to go. Going backwards is going to be annoying, and going straight down was going to be a little treacherous. So they sat here and gave it some consideration for a minute, collected a bunch of data, and then decided to just slide down the outcrop. And then they found another path and were able to collect the data and go on down and successfully shoot the rest of the GCPs. And then they came over here and they leaned it against a truck, and at which point it was my responsibility to finish off the equipment. And I take full responsibility, and I'm a big fan of humbling oneself. Here we go. I didn't turn it off. I think the sun was in my eyes, or it was washing out the little on indicator on the equipment, but I thought it was off. I just didn't hold the button long enough. So here's our path from about Renovo, Pennsylvania, down to Middletown, Pennsylvania. And then here it collected an enormous amount of data sitting on my desk until it ran out of batteries the following Saturday morning. But this goes to one of my guiding principles when I was thinking about the equipment and the methods I want to use for this, and that's to retain control over the data processing as much as possible. So here I collected an enormous heap of just completely trashed data, and the file size was big. But because I can get in and I can manipulate it on a really basic level, I was able to just strip out all of that data, erase the fact that I screwed up in the field, and then it was a very manageable file size that I was able to carry through for the rest of the processing. And then finally, we use drone to map to stitch together all of our images. And while we were assessing software, I trialed a number of them, and they all work very well. So a lot of them are desktop applications. Some are more black boxy things. Some are just they're kind of like project based. So you don't pay anything. You just kind of get some credits, and they'll process a map, and they'll bill you a small amount for their processing time, and that's it. And they all worked very well. And the reason that we ultimately went with Drone to Map is it's an Esri product, and we do have an existing contract with Esri as the state government. So it was very simple to just get a license and get back to work. So to round out this equipment and methods section, I'm looking at our drone program as having come together in two different phases. The first phase was our initial, like, let's figure out how all of this works and get the basic hardware and see how we like it. And that cost about $2,300. So that includes the iPad, the drone, and sitting for and passing my FAA license. And then the second phase is where we're at now, is really leaning into drone mapping. And here's where we've picked up the two MLID units. We've got the drone to map license. That is unfortunately a recurring subscription. It seems to be impossible to get away from those completely, but I'm okay with it because I only have one. Then I picked up the extra batteries and the really fancy control points. So to date, I've spent less than $10,000, and that seems like a big price tag, but for the capabilities, I think that's pretty reasonable, especially considering how much alternatives cost that folks really kind of pushed. You talk to salesmen and they're like, well, you need this thing that costs $10,000 and this service that costs $1,500 a year. And I've largely sidestepped all of that. And I'm getting the same results as I would have if I would have, blown the bank budget on all the fancy stuff. So I'm very happy with our capabilities and what we can make with the amount of money we spend. So that's enough talking about software and equipment. Now we're just going to look at pictures for the rest of the evening and models and talk about fun stuff. And we're going to start off by doing that through looking at how it's improved field safety. And we're going to take a look at the Ferensville 7.5-minute quad map, where Rosanna Baer and Vic Schema mapped that in semi-recent years. And specifically this section along Route 120. You can see it's a very steep hill here. The contours are stacked together. And this is what it looks like in the field. It's a big outcrop of the Burgoon sitting right on top of the Huntley Mountain. So there's contact at the base of this. And nobody was really excited about standing at the base of this thing and working. And if you look at the amount of boulders and the size of them, I can't blame anybody for not wanting to work at the base of this thing. So we have a drone, let's put it to use. We'll go out and see what we can see. And so we're going to take a look at that kind of debris chute, centrally located here in the photo. And you can just see there's just enormous boulders in various states of sliding, getting ready to roll, getting ready to tumble down this thing. And then here's where the zoom camera or the zoom lens really came in handy, because I don't want to get pancaked by a boulder, but I also don't want my equipment to get taken out of the sky by a boulder rolling off the top of this thing. So we were able to stay at a comfortable distance away from the outcrop and then zoom in to get the detail that we needed. And then on down the outcrop, it helped with interpreting with what we saw at the outcrop. And to make an example of that, we're going to look at this. Well, I got it circled in yellow. I don't need the laser. That chunk of rock to the left of this other debris chute. This is farther west down the outcrop. And here it is in a 3D model. And looking at this thing from the ground, you could tell that these rocks were out of place. And it looked like they might be fault controlled, but we didn't have any evidence of a fault. They were just not how all the other rocks looked. But once we were able to look at it from the sky and manipulate this model and twist and turn and look at it from a bunch of angles, it really became apparent that this is just really goes to the crumbly nature of the Burgoon at this outcrop. This is just a giant block of the outcrop that's detached and is just slowly rotating out of place. And without being able to get up above it and look down, I don't know that we would have arrived at that interpretation. So it's also helped us be more efficient in the field. And I've got two examples of that. The first one is up in the Seven Mountains area of Center County along Route 322. I'm sure we're all familiar with this stretch of road. PennDOT worked up there for what seemed like an eternity, although they've recently completed it and it's a very pleasant drive now. But in 2019, it was still under construction. And so what happened here, there was two fault planes that activated and this outcrop started falling apart. So PennDOT decided they needed to secure it, and you can see they're starting to put a retaining mesh here at the top of the outcrop, and they're going to work down. And thankfully, they were aware of our TASIC program, or the Temporarily Available Stratigraphic Information Collection Program. And really all that is some forms that are pre-formatted to get people out to an outcrop quickly and collect the bare minimum data that we want to preserve going into the future. So they got in touch with us, and Rosanna and I took 3 interns out, and they focused on measuring and describing the entire exposed section here of the Bald Eagle and the Juniata Formation. And it was an active work site. So there's equipment driving around. Thankfully, they're at the base of this thing, you know, tucked away out of harm of the equipment. But taking pictures, like, you got to get back and you got to focus on that. And I would have been right in the middle of the path that all the loaders and stuff were coming in and out of the site on. But because I had a drone up in the sky, I was able to just kind of tuck myself out of harm's way and check out the entire outcrop. And here's one of the culprits that activated and was sloughing material down off the outcrop. But I took around 650 pictures that day manually, just flying a grid in front of this thing. And so this is going to be preserved. This is another way to preserve the outcrop. So not only are we collecting that data by measuring the section, describing it, we've got a model here that we can manipulate, take measurements from, and we'll have that into the future. So another place where the drone really made an efficient field day was when we were responding to a sinkhole service request out in Cumberland County. And here's the site to give you some lay of the land here. This feature in the center is a very large retaining basin that extends well beyond the bottom of this photograph. Off to the left here, there's a big housing development being built. And then over here on the right side, there are residential homes. And last fall, when Hurricane Ida came through town and flooded everybody, it also flooded this basin, just completely overwhelmed it, and also activated a bunch of sinkholes in it. And this homeowner who lives here contacted Rosanna, very concerned because they were seeing sinkholes here. You can see there's trees missing in the woods here. That's kind of a hole that the sinkholes opened up. And they seem to be opening going right towards their property and specifically their sand mounds. So they were understandably concerned. So we went out to see what we could do for them. And so we checked out these sinks in the woods initially. We just walked down through their yard out in here and looked at sinks in the woods and then this sink. And I knew I wanted a control point out here. So decided, you know, I was here, I was just going to stomp my way through all the vegetation in the basin. And I stomped this path out and someone had to return out and drop the point, but at least I paved the way. I didn't feel bad if I sent someone else out with a 5-gallon bucket lid to just drop on the ground. But we're really glad that we did what we're doing here in this picture. So once we were done here, we set up a little camp up here and we just flew the drone over the site to see what we could see because it was a big site. It was very overgrown. And we wanted to figure out the best way to tackle the day. And even the homeowners were even very willing to go out and help us. And I think actually one of the homeowners dropped the control point out here for me. But we would have never spotted this while we were in the field if we had not flown over everything. I walked out here, I was only maybe 20 feet away from it, and I had no idea that there was a hole of this size over here just because of how overgrown this basin was. So we spotted that right away, and Rosanna made plans to swing back down there before we left the day. And then she inspected everything, and I made a map. And here's a clip of the map. So you can see Here's the sinkholes in the woods. They don't really come up well, but you can see trees toppling into the sinks. Here's that big sinkhole with my path going down to the control point that was laid before I took these photos. And then as we looked at this back in the office, we found all of these sink features, and the ones in red we didn't notice while we were out in the field. We didn't notice it looking at the little screen on the iPad, but it jumped out to us right here. And thankfully the homeowners are lovely people, and they were willing to go out and ground truth that. And this one here turned out to be an actual sink in the wall of the retention basin. And then this feature up here was just a groundhog hole. So we didn't really have to get too concerned about that. And then we flew around to get some different perspectives of the sinks. It was actually remarkably tricky to get the sinkholes in the woods, decent shot. There's still a lot of tree cover. But this perspective I think is pretty cool. So I'm hovering right over the center of the sinkhole and looking at it from that perspective. And there might be some folks here or online that are willing to go out in a sink like this to get this perspective, but I'm too big of a chicken to go out. So I'm really glad I can just fly a camera out above this and get these perspectives of the sinkholes. And then we went back out in December because there was some additional sinkhole activity. And we took 3 interns with us. They're here out with the MLID shooting some control points for us. And unfortunately, the perils of using the iPad interface, I did bump a button, I think, and the pictures all took at an angle about 42 degrees. So you can't make a map out of photos taken at an angle like that. Everything needs to be 90 degrees facing straight down. And then up here, there is a happy resolution to all of this. This is Rosanna meeting with someone from the County Conservation District. And in Pennsylvania, the conservation districts are responsible for enforcing erosion and sedimentation control plans, which this basin is subjected to. The developer is responsible for it. So they were able to come out, see things in the field. All these pictures and maps really showed the extent of the problem very clearly to the conservation district and everybody else who would listen to us. And they were able to then leverage the developer to go out and remediate these sinks in the spring. We've also used our drone to help our publications. And so we initially took it out to Ohiopile for our 2021 field conference. And so that's out here in the southwest part of the state. And there's 3 sites out here I'm going to showcase. From top left to bottom right, that first start is going to be some exposed bedrock in the Youghiogheny River. And then in the center of the screen is Bachman Rock Overlook. And then finally in the lower right is going to be Turtle Head Rock Bog. So while we were preparing the documents, Jim Shawless, who was the trip leader, knew he wanted to talk about regional joint patterns. And he knew a great spot was this spot in the Yacht just south of town. But at the time, this was the best available imagery for him to use. So thankfully, we have the drone and we were able to go out and make a little map here that geo-referenced very nicely where it needed to be. You can zoom in and see all the detail that Jim needed for this image to be included in the guidebooks. He was able to annotate all of that to tell the story he wanted to tell the folks at this site. Similarly, we took it over to Bachman Rock Overlook, which at the time was very overgrown. So you couldn't stand on the overlook and get a nice picture. Thankfully, there was enough of an opening in the tree canopy that we were able to squeeze the drone out through there and get out into this valley and mosaic all of these images together into this landscape that Jim was able to then annotate for the field conference. And then finally, here's the turtle head of Turtle Head Rock Bog. It looms over the bog. And a similar case as the Yacht. There was very low quality imagery. And we were out there the previous spring in 2019 and did a test map up there. So Jim was able to use all of those photos in the map we made to annotate to show very clearly where he collected age dating samples. And then this is a query out on, now we're in the really fun, cool stuff here, just playing around with cool imagery. This is a query out on the border of Bucks and Montgomery County. There was a stop in the 2018 field conference, and it just stuck in my mind because it's a Hornfels quarry. And I hopped out of the truck when we got to the site, and there's a really nice green crystal next to my foot on the ground. And I was like, I really like this quarry, and it just kind of stuck in my mind. So then as I started working Here's the quarry. When I started working with the drone and thinking about how to like model vertical features, I realized I needed a place like a quarry that I could just go and fly the drone and not have to talk to people that might be passing by an outcrop along like a rail trail or working along a road. So this was a very peaceful location. We were on good terms with the geologist who works this quarry, so I got in touch with him. He was very willing to let us come out for a day, and he brought one of his own interns. So we spent a day looking at some nice green crystals in this quarry and flying a camera around. And this is a 360 panorama I made from where we were working in the quarry. And there's a ton of detail in these mosaic images if you zoom in. So there's a lot of really cool features in here. So right here, you can see the quarry working this high wall. They blasted that out, and you can see the cleanup that's going on down below it. Moving right across the photo, there's this thing in the center, which, you know, I know it's not fault offset, but you can look at it and you can see those white beds do look a little bit offset. Thankfully, there's enough detail you can zoom in and see very clear that it's a block that just fell off the high wall, giving that optical illusion of offset. There's some discoloration going on over here. You can zoom in on this mosaic and you can see that it's very likely a seep coming out of the high wall. And then over here, I just like this because there's people actually doing real work in the quarry that day while I was out playing with my camera. This rig was active all day, drilling a number of holes. So here's the extent of mapping I did while I was out there. And more specifically, what I was out there really to do was to make this 3D model. I wanted to practice flying around, and because it's all manual. There's a lot of automated solutions for 2D planimetric stuff, but there's really nothing for vertical surfaces, and it's tricky to do all of this by eyeballing and to just maintain a steady hand with the control. So I just really appreciate the opportunity that this quarry gave me for practicing that. But there's a lot of detail here, and I've shown a couple models earlier in the presentation, and they were kind of grainy low image or grainy low res GIFs. And that was out of necessity to get the animation into the presentation. But the models themselves are very crisp and very detailed. And what really surprised me was that power line that the camera sensor caught going down into the quarry. So if you look closely, you can see the actual power line going down in there. And that's just a little thin black line in the sea of all this other detail. And the camera was able to pick that out and make features in the point cloud around that. So that gives me a lot of confidence that the sensor in the camera is doing an adequate job. So here's the model spinning around. And this is what I was out doing. So all of these are photo locations. And to go back to that, and you need enough juice to get through the day. You see there's a big gap, right? I wasn't able to finish taking all the pictures I wanted to, but I took enough to be happy with this model. And so I've shown a number of these models, and they look neat and they help with interpretations, but I want to maximize the applications of everything we can do. So now if you'll allow me to just talk about GIS for a minute, which is where my allegiance lies. This is made possible strictly due to ArcPro, and this isn't a novel thing that I came up with. I don't remember which survey it was, but there was a digital mapping techniques meeting at some time during COVID lockdowns. And this was showcased by another survey, how they use 3D features to guide their 2D mapping efforts. And if you're familiar with ArcMap runs on a map by map basis. So you can have two maps of the same thing, but they're two distinct files. And if you are referencing the same data in those two maps, you can't edit it because it's being accessed from two locations. But ArcPro operates at a project level. So you have a project up here, then you have all the maps within that project. So the data is referenced on a project level. So if you have data from one source and multiple maps within the same project, you can work with that data. And what you can do with that is you can use 3D models, in this case, to guide digitizing 2D lines. So here, what I'm doing along the front of this is I'm dropping nodes in a polyline along the front of this on this kind of thick bed. And then once you finish that feature, it automatically appears on the 2D map. And I think there's a lot of possibility there. I'm very excited about this. And this isn't something that's unique to models made by drones. You could do this with LiDAR data. I'm just very excited that it also works with our drones. And talking with a few geologists here, one of them is actually using LiDAR data to help his mapping using this technique. And I'm just super excited about this. And I just want you all to share in my joy about this. So that really brings me around to the end of what I wanted to talk to you all about. So consumer level drones absolutely will work. When I started down this path, talking to some folks, they were like, oh, you need this giant clunky drone that's going to cost 15 grand and you've got a giant carrying case. And, my drone costs less than $2,000 and I can throw it in a backpack and it's getting the job done. Modestly priced alternatives to enable drone mapping exist in the form of these MLID units that cost two of them cost half of what one alternative might cost. And we've realized benefits to a number of staff geologists here, from mapping projects to responding to service requests to outreach, getting people excited about GIS and geology stuff. And then it's being used in our publications. And I really believe that similar setups like this can be implemented other places, whether it be academic departments or small consulting companies. So I've worked for a number of consultants and doing like a phase one and being able to, make a site map on demand of the conditions of your site that day is just mind blowing to me. And I would be rushing to embrace this if I could. I can here. So thanks everybody for your time and attention this evening.
That's what it looked like.
Yeah, are you in this? So yeah, thanks everybody. I've said my piece and I'm happy to answer any questions folks may have.
For those of you online, if you want to put your questions in the chat box.
Mike.
A lot of the focus of the ground control points and stuff was to improve the DEMs, but I haven't seen any.
I haven't gotten any really DEMs worth looking at out of this. They're all.
Even the one at Turtle had Bog, which was
It
interesting.
was. And I suppose I should have thrown some in here, but the DEMs, I haven't made any neat DEMs since I've got the control points. So the control points tie your data into a real world datum, horizontal and vertical. Without that, your elevation products are going to be in altitude, and that's feet above or below the point that you took off. And that kind of makes analysis with those really awkward / impossible. But they're fun to look at. So I apologize, Mike, for not putting that in there, but you do see a lot of detail in them. So at that Turtlehead rock bog we did, I played around with the DEM there, and you can see individual boulders on the floor of the forest, the logs laying on the ground. So there is detail and you can see features, but I haven't had an opportunity to really work with the DEM. So that sinkhole site, what I really wanted to do was take the DEM from the first time out, get a DEM from our second visit, and then compare any changes. But because I have fat fingers and I adjusted the angle of the camera lens and I didn't notice it until I got back to the office, that opportunity kind of went away.
So we got lots of questions from online.
Sweet.
I'll do a couple and then I'll let you guys. So first off, Bob Beard says, do you require a survey license in addition to the FAA license? I assume he means land survey.
No, you don't need to be a licensed surveyor. And I was very deliberate in not referring to anything I do as a survey. I'm strictly just making maps with a high degree of accuracy. And you shouldn't be using this in lieu of a professional survey if you're doing something that requires a professional survey.
And Nathan asks, how does wind affect the drone and the resulting data?
That's a good question. So wind, I have not seen wind affect the data. However, recognizing the common theme of power consumption, wind and weather really do affect the drone quite heavily. So each one of the props in the drone we have has its own little smart engine, motor, whatever you want to call it. And so it's constantly stabilizing itself up in the air. So if you get hit with a gust of wind, The drone's going to, divert a lot of power to the props it needs. All 4 of them, they're going to adjust their speed to keep that drone as steady as possible. And it does a good job staying stable up to about 25-mile-an-hour wind gusts. Once you get up about 30-mile-an-hour gusts, it hits it. It hasn't been a problem, but it doesn't like it. And that's one of the things that triggers the alarm warning. So you get hit with a big gust of wind and everything kind of turns red. A warning pops up on your screen. And I don't think there's any sound involved, but it's very obvious that the software highly recommends that you land the drone instead of continuing operating it. Weather also really affects the drone in terms of battery consumption with temperature. So it doesn't really like temperature extremes. It hates hot weather. Hot weather does a number on the lithium batteries that power this thing. So they'll burn through charge very quickly. They can actually get to a point where they will not work. They'll overheat. They won't turn on. Your drone won't work. It's very temperature dependent. And then cold weather, I haven't had problems with it just outright refusing to fly, but you'll notice the charge drains much faster when it's chilly out. I found about 65 to 75 degrees is perfect conditions, which is also one of my favorite temperature ranges to be outside. And this has really turned me into a fair weather geologist. If you have one of these jobs, it's great because you can only work when the weather's nice. You can't work in the rain, and it works best in my preferred temperature range. So it's awesome. So weather really does have an effect on the drone, but I haven't seen it affect the resulting data.
So on the theme of power consumption, aside from batteries, what do you consider the greatest limitation for your setup? And what would be your dream addition if you could have anything to add to this?
Let's see. I'd say the biggest limitation might be kind of the sparsely documented stuff that comes with the MLIDs. So they're very capable units, but you're very self-reliant to figure out how to use them. So I found out someone here in the audience is using these, and I was tipped off to use them by a professor out at Westchester, Martin Helmke. So there's kind of like a little local support group forming that we can help each other figure out how to use these things. But I've done it. If I can do it, anybody can figure out how to use these things. They're challenging, but they're not impenetrable. And if I could have anything, I would love to have a waterproof drone that is not affected by the electromagnetism in power lines and can also haul a LiDAR unit and also a budget to purchase that said LiDAR unit. So a few hundred to several $100,000 would make me really happy and enable a lot of really cool projects.
Interrupt me. I'm just going to keep going.
One clarification for you were showing the flight planning software. I don't think I heard you say. Basically, he lays out that what he wants to map, sets those parameters, pushes a button, so to speak, and uploads it to the drone. The drone takes off and does all that work itself.
Yeah, it just goes up and does all of that. And it really is, as easy as pressing that blue button once it becomes blue and it takes off and does it. But there's a lot of planning that goes into it. So like I said, I like to do my initial planning on the desktop before I go out to the field. But it's really critical that you walk your site and you become familiar with it because there are regulations to maintain buffer distances around features. So off the top of my head, one that I ran into personally was around like radio towers. You need to give them a wide berth because they have support wires coming down that might be too small for the drone sensors to identify. So the drone has a lot of safeguards built in. If it sees an object, it'll just stop. It's very hard to fly into a tree. It's very hard to fly into yourself. So you do have to check your site out and make any adjustments, whether it's adjusting the footprint of your planned flight or changing the flight altitude to accommodate to features like radio towers.
Okay. Alexander asked, do you have to worry about getting permission from owners of the land to photograph?
You do. So this is really murky waters, and it's a good question because it comes up a lot. So you hear a lot of people saying, if I ever see a drone above my house, I'm going to blast it out of the sky with a shotgun. And that's a really quick way to get yourself in hot water with the federal government because FAA, the feds control airspace. So I'm in airspace right now, and now I'm not, I'm back on the ground. But while I'm up in the air, I'm subject to federal regulations, and you can't fire a gun at a plane. You can't shine a bright laser at a plane. Those same things are extended to drones. Don't do it. Um, so nobody other than the feds owns the airspace. So really, if you want to get technical, I could operate anywhere I want. But a lot of municipalities have laws restricting use of drones in their jurisdiction. Our state parks, you can't fly in state parks but for a few exceptions where there might be like RC fields or approved drone operation areas. I think there's 2 parks that I can think of off the top of my head. The Game Commission doesn't allow people to fly drones on their property, but there are mechanisms to request permission. So if I'm going to operate in a state park, even though I'm DCNR and we're all under the same umbrella of DCNR with the state parks and the survey, I still reach out to the park manager and just confirm with them that see if they mind me doing this, because even though I'm allowed to, technically, I don't want to encourage copycats. So I don't want to go out and have some Joe Schmo see me operating and think that he can do that, and then they start operating, and then that can go places that I don't want to be responsible for. So yeah, if I'm operating anywhere, I always get permission from the landowner before I'm out, just because it's a lot easier to have a conversation about what I'm doing before I do it. Then someone sees a drone, sees me with the control of my hand, and then they're angry and we're in a charge situation. I don't like confrontation.
So,
Did I see a hand back here?
I was just gonna ask you, have you been attacked by a bird of prey?
I have. Not a bird of prey. Crows. Crows hate drones. Crows and small birds really take issue with it. Birds of prey don't seem to care. I've seen videos of like hawks and eagles taking drones out,
Yeah.
but really, around in Pennsylvania, you've seen like a hawk flying away with a bunch of small birds or crows pecking at it. That's what they do to the drone, and it's kind of nerve-wracking because you see them coming and you're just, oh my God, here comes a flock of birds. Any of them going to be pissed off at me today? And sometimes like they'll pass and you think you're in the clear, then like 3 will peel off. Here we go. But it's actually pretty easy to get out of those situations, assuming you're not flying at the max height that the drone's allowed to. So FAA restricts flying to 400 feet. There's built-in safeguards that you cannot fly 400 feet above your takeoff point. So if you're not at 400 feet, say you're working at like 200 feet, 115, you see some birds take an issue with you, they don't want you in their space, just fly up. Birds can't go up quickly. They can dive bomb you. Don't try to land your equipment. Don't try to fly horizontally, get away from them. Just go up. It's that simple. You go up, they can't hit you, and they go on with their day. Or they perch nearby and wait for you to land, that's also a fun thing. Doing a test out here in the parking lot at 2 crows who just did not want anything to do with the drone. I flew up and they just parked themselves, and I would fly down. And once I got down to their level, they would swoop over and I would fly up. So then it was a case where I had someone go out and just bang on the light that they were perched on to get them to fly away. Then I quickly landed and we just called it an afternoon. But I don't want to lose a $1,500 piece of equipment to a cranky bird.
do you think that there will be a vertical automated paths?
I do. It already kind of exists, although I haven't had any success using it. Esri has an application. I'm blanking on the name of it. It's very similar to like Drone Deploy. You can automate flights, and one of those is flying a vertical feature. I've tried to use it, and I can't get the drone wouldn't take off. So I don't know if it's I programmed the flight incorrectly, or if it's just a flawed app that didn't like maybe my iPad on that day. I don't know, but I was hitting the button to take off. I had planned out the flight, and it just wouldn't lift off. So until something like that exists, I'm just really focused on getting comfortable with the controls and getting a good gut feeling for how to fly across things.
I'm going to go into a theme of crashing. Susan asks, can a drone hit a power line?
It probably could. I haven't gotten close to power lines, but because the drones have a compass in it, power lines can really mess with the drone's navigation. So I don't know that it would crash into the power line, but it could very likely lose its bearings and just crash into something else. There are drones that are shielded from there. They don't have I forget what kind of navigation they use, but it's not affected by the electromagnetism that comes with power lines. So power companies who use drones and like thermal cameras to inspect their lines, They have very special drones designed not to get confused by the power line.
Bob wants to know if your drone crashes, can it get up on its own or are you stuck retrieving it yourself?
Oh, you're actually stuck retrieving it by yourself. So usually there's only been a couple times where I've been in a hairy situation, whether it's wind or a bunch of birds coming through, but I try to make a habit to glance down at that mini map to get an idea of where the drone might be. And then hopefully I can hustle over there before things power down. I can fall. You can see where the remote is on that mini map. So in theory, you could move and watch yourself move. Or if the drone crashes, maybe a prop's damaged, it can't get off the ground, but it's still powered on. You'll still see that little indicator on the map. So hopefully it's not using too much power. So that's the importance of being aware of power. So if you think you might crash, just don't run your battery low, so you always have enough time to find it.
Do you crash very often?
Do
Or
I?
is it a crash rare?
I've never crashed. I don't know how to crash because at least with the equipment I have, it's got sensors on the top, on the bottom, and on all four sides of it. And if you're looking at the display in DJI Go, you'll see as you get closer to objects, it lights up in those. So if you're flying forward and there's an object in front of the drone, like the top part of the iPad display will turn green. And then as you get closer to it, it becomes yellow and then red. And then I think it's like maybe like 5 to 7 feet where it just stops moving. It will not move forward. You can disable those sensors if you really want to run into things. And the only time I've disabled it is I found myself in a situation I didn't really think through. I took off from a spot that then there was what this situation was, but I couldn't get the drone close enough to the landing spot without disabling the sensors to come in and land. And then even then it was kind of hairy and it wasn't quite flat. So what I decided to do is I was just going to snatch the drone out of the air. It's kind of a harrowing experience. You just kind of get the drone close to you. But if you have those sensors on and you have your hand up ready to catch it and you're trying to land it in your hand, it still won't land in your hand. You got to be real fast about it. Right? Real fast and confident, just grabbed it out of the air. So I turned off the sensor so I could just, very calmly pull it out of the air and then turn it off.
Well, Lisa wants to know if the drone's covered under our insurance.
That's a good
In
question.
case of injury.
That's a good question. I don't know.
I would say yes.
I think so. That's kind of the sentiment I got when I got this. I was like, do we need insurance for this? And you're like, no, probably not.
Any other equipment we have.
There is drone specific insurance. So if you're doing this for like a living, you're self-employed or whatever, there are insurance companies that you don't have to pay for insurance every day of the year. If you know you're only going to be out for 3 hours on Thursday, you can buy insurance for those 3 hours on Thursday.
All right, new topic. Jim wants to know, other than photo and video, what are the other remote sensors available?
Oh gosh.
Infrared.
Yeah, so there's infrared, thermal, and then there's multispectral, but I'm not super familiar with what all you can get out of that. The big ones I'm aware of are the infrared and thermal. And thermal has a lot of cool applications. So folks use that. You can see temperature differences in water. You can use it to spot springs seeping out of hillsides.
Search and rescue.
Search and rescue, exactly. Yep. Bill?
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of drone videos lately and infrared and shotguns and all that sort of thing. Sinkhole spring to mind. Is this thing capable of dropping grenades?
We've been watching the combat footage out of Ukraine. No, I thought that we might get through this tonight without can you weaponize your drone? And no, we cannot weaponize the drone that we have. The drone we have cannot carry any payload at all. You would need a more beefy drone capable of carrying a payload.
Now, the Kentucky Geological Survey has tested micrograph.
Mhm.
They have a pretty beefy drone that can carry a payload. They were saying, could they do fly over? Preliminary results is no. It's too, like, you're better off dragging it on the ground or carrying it at a low altitude, but once you get up a certain, you're just not picking it up.
I believe there's magnetometers that you can mount on drones, and there's some interest
And the
in
like-
doing that in Pennsylvania to help identify some like abandoned oil and gas wells.
Right.
You did mention LiDAR.
I think, I don't know that I mentioned LiDAR.
You said you.
I said I want LiDAR. Yeah. Yeah, and drone-based LiDAR is pretty mind-blowing in the amount of detail. So the LiDAR that was recently flown in Pennsylvania is QL2. So I believe, Ellen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's guaranteed 2 points per square meter. Yeah, 2 returns per square meter. And drone-based LiDAR, I mean, you're looking at like hundreds of points per square meter. So you can really use that to see an incredible amount of detail, or penetrate some stuff that traditional LiDAR might. So if you're trying to look at maybe like a really overgrown quarry or something, drone-based LiDAR may be able to bombard that with enough lasers to penetrate that thick vegetation that traditional LiDAR might not.
The trick with that is power,
Power.
right? Because all your other cameras are passive sensors and they're picking up what the sun reflecting. LiDAR has an active sensor, so you're juicing that thing.
Yeah.
So you're gonna be up there for like 4 minutes, pumping pulses. And then you gotta come home.
Well, Bob wants to know, can you ever use a drone in an abandoned mine shaft or an attic, or is it too risky of crashing?
Yes, you can. I probably wouldn't take ours in because once you get into indoor situations in a mine, especially, you're going to lose contact with the satellite navigation system. So this thing relies on GPS to not only know where it is taking the photos, so all these photos are tagged with an X and a Y location, but it also uses it for navigation and stabilization. So I've tried taking this off inside once, and it just kind of comes up and it's like the drone's drunk. I was like, I'm not ever doing that again.
So, Bob, we are looking into purchasing a handheld LiDAR scanner to map caves and other indoor applications. And one of the things that we want to try with it is lowering it into a sinkhole.
Yeah. The drones that are capable of going into like treacherous places are pretty cool. So there's drones specifically designed for like inspecting pipes. So if you've got like a 1.5 to 2 foot diameter pipe, there are drones with like a cage built around them, like a ball. And they're stable enough in that thing that they can fly down that, and it doesn't really matter that they don't have their very precise navigation. They can just bounce off the walls, but there's enough room between their cage and the props that it still stays fine. It can just zoom right down the pipe.
That was it for the online questions. You guys have any other?
But,
Tom has a question.
well, when you start getting into the larger drones and the larger lithium-ion batteries, you also have problems with getting them in transportation.
Oh, absolutely.
Disposable.
Yeah.
It's like the Tesla car, they will burn very easily.
Definitely. All right.
Thank you, Craig.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
That was wonderful. And I would like to thank all of you for showing up. It's really nice to fill the room. This is awesome and feels like old times. And thank you all for tuning in online. We're going to do it again next month. And I invite all of you and those of you online, consider joining us for dinner. We had a great time over at Tattered Flag, and we're going to continue doing that. So stay tuned. Amy will send out the notifications for next month shortly. Thank you. Have a good night.
You know, where do you have Doug Miller from? Professor, Penn State.
Yes.
That's lost.
Yeah.